All right. Tasting wine. We're popping some corks tonight with Adam Mitchell.
Hey,
And Adam and I don't have the same wine, but Adam is a self-professed wine drinker, but not necessarily somebody who, um, you know, it expands a lot on the wine knowledge. He goes, Adam, how do you shop for wine?
how do I shop for wine?
Yeah,
I actually by price. I'll be honest.
price. Okay. So
Yeah,
what do you? So obviously, then I think we're going to assume that you make a determination that the higher the price, the better the wine.
I make an assumption that the
Yeah.
higher price, the better the wine.
do
That's right.
you do you besides price, besides buying, the wine that's at $20 or $30 or $50 or whatever it is that you think is an appropriate price, is there any other criteria that you look for?
For some reason, I like the Washington State wines. They've been pretty
Okay.
good.
Okay.
And then I got to admit, I bought this because of the bottle,
Okay. So the shape of the bottle and the label, maybe.
shape of the bottle, and the label.
All right.
There's this recent one on like I don't know what it was, like something criminals, and there's like criminals on the bottle.
Yeah. And then you actually can use your phone and look at those labels, and they talk to you and move and all that kind of stuff. Well,
Right.
I think actually, so you did say, so you shop on price, you shop on the bottle, shape, size, label, all that kind of stuff. Maybe some sort of app feature or whatever. That's all cool. But what's kind of missing out of that equation to me a little bit, and you did point out one thing though that you do shop by, which is the state. So one of the things that's missing is actually what might be in the bottle, rather than the exterior of the bottle and the price. So you're influenced by what exactly, a lot of, especially larger producers, but a lot of people spend a lot of money putting an effort into, which is the wow factor, the aesthetic, the appeal, because you're walking down an aisle in a store or a supermarket or wherever it is that you're shopping for wine, and you're not actually tasting that wine. You're looking at the label, you're looking at the bottle shape, and you're looking at the price. Those are the considerations.
Right. Can we
Yeah.
start this over again?
Okay. I thought that was going pretty well.
It was going pretty well, but I think we can go better because I don't think you introduced me as your brother.
I did. I said, "Here's Adam, my brother."
Oh, but I also am seeing as I'm talking to you.
I can see your screen in your glasses.
Yeah, so there's that. So I'm going to take those off.
Okay.
Hey Siri, stop. There's the background music, and now I understand where you're going, so I'll be able to answer those questions a little bit better.
Well, I think the the sort of lead in and the sort of the raw just question there got me where I was going, because where I was going with it next was, the one thing that I kind of look for to start with is either going to be grape variety, the region. I'm not looking at price. I'm not looking at labels, and so for me, somebody who I think has a little bit more wine knowledge, I look at it and come at it from a different approach. So,
Yes.
but I think you're also in the same group of like the vast majority of wine drinkers out there, where you don't really spend a lot of time reading about wine. You go into the shop, you have in your mind probably a little bit of what you're going to spend. Your range is $15 to $25, whatever, and you say, okay, what's the best wine I can get for them? You go down the shelf and you see a wine. Did you actually look at the grape variety on that wine when you bought it tonight? Because you didn't mention that. What is the grape variety?
I have no idea.
Well, look at the label. The front of the label. It's usually in big letters right in front.
It is.
Yeah, what is it?
Lush and jammy with salted caramel notes.
There you go. Okay, so you've sort of missed on everything that I would actually look at, which to me, I go in and I'm looking for a wine to drink with something tonight. Maybe, I'm eating a certain dish, or I'm looking for, I got a kind of feel that I want something with a little bit more acidity in it or whatever. And I kind of have an idea of a grape variety in mind. I've got a region in mind. And I'm not necessarily, I've got my price range, but when I shop, I'm shopping with some specific criteria. Almost first and foremost, it's going to be whatever the wine is made from, that grape. And then secondly, it's usually where it's from. So when you did the introduction part, when I was asking you about the wine, the one thing you did say was Washington State. You like wines from Washington State. So why do you like wines from Washington State?
I'm not so sure. It's probably based on experience, but I can tell you why I bought this bottle. It's because it is a Pinot, and I know that
Yep.
Pinot usually have less sulfites, right?
Maybe sometimes depends on the producer, but yeah, in theory,
Right.
could, sure.
So I like to go low on the sulfites.
Okay. I'm not sure you got there tonight.
um, but I like darker, richer wines. I like, you know, I if I'm going to drink a beer, I'm going to drink a stout. I'm not going to drink a
Sure.
Pilsner.
So
I
you
don't.
like robust kind of flavors. You like good intensity in your flavors. What's the alcohol content on that Pinot
You're
Noir?
recording right now.
I've recorded the whole thing.
It's 16%.
Just a shy 16%. So, all right. So listen, yeah, we got that. It's beautiful. Um, so listen, you know, you're like a lot of people out there, right? You
Yeah.
go in, you got your price point, you got a style that you kind of have in the back of your mind, but you know, you're not, you know, staying up late every night reading wine magazines and you know, trying to figure out your wine note catalog and what's in your cellar. You know, you just kind of drink what you have, you enjoy it. And but I did like the fact that you said Washington State. And I think, you know, I know your drinking habits. I know you like lush wines, you like a little bit fuller bodied wines. They just have to taste good. One of the things I do appreciate about Washington State is that it's a region that produces grapes and wines that are grapes for wines that are a little bit more lush. They have a little bit more round fruit quality to them. Typically, you know, you don't really find a lot of Pinot Noir grown in Washington, and because it's a
You know,
little bit warmer.
Project Washington, is that where, is that the Pinot Project? Is that a wine?
Pinot Project is a California wine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but wines like that, like Pinot Project and stuff, those wines in those categories tend to come. So those are wines that I would necessarily consider to be sort of classic Pinot Noir kind of style. Classic Pinot Noir tends to come from cooler climates. So in California, the cooler climates are along the coast near the ocean, which is cool and helps to moderate the temperatures of the vineyards near there. And Pinot Noir tends to do well with there. So from Santa Barbara through Monterey, Carneros, the Russian River, and Sonoma, all along the coast is where Pinot Noir tends to grow. Things like Pinot Project and some of the other wines that tend to be a little bit lower in the price point, I think, come from slightly warmer areas because there's bigger tracts of land. It's easier to grow grapes there, but you don't get the acidity. You don't get the sort of elegance that you might get in a cool climate area. So Pinot Noir is it's a great grape, I think, for and wine for people who want softer flavors, gentle fruit, don't want a lot of tannin. But not all Pinot Noir, like not all other grapes, are produced the same everywhere. So it's a little different. And generally speaking, 16% alcohol is not something that I would expect maybe from Pinot Noir. So that's a little bit of a shocker there on that one. So.
So Brian, you were saying earlier that the Pinot Noir should be like visible. You should be able to see through it.
Yeah,
But
so Pinot Noir typically,
almost like a coffee.
right. So Pinot Noir, if you were to take your glass, like if this isn't Pinot Noir, but if this was Pinot Noir and I were to tilt it at about a 45-degree angle, and I were to look down through it, or if I put the glass on the table and I was trying to look straight down through the glass, if I could read at an angle, if I held my wine in a glass, my wine glass at an angle, if I could actually kind of read, say, some text off a piece of paper through that, or see the top of the stem, you're using a stemless glass, but if I look down through the glass and I can see the top of the stem, typically that's what you're going to see with Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir should be more of like a medium intensity ruby red color, generally speaking. But a lot of the trend has been with Pinot Noirs lately that are kind of like yours. They have a little bit more amped up color and intensity and everything.
Why is
Offering,
why
well, it's
did it
a
change? Is that a
yeah,
trend? That
it is definitely a trend by producers who are appealing to folks who want a little bit more flavor. I remember a couple of years back, I was working at a table, and the gentleman asked me for the Pinot Noir that tasted like Cabernet. And I'm like, okay, I have fuller bodied Pinots, but if you want to drink Cabernet, let's drink some Cabernet. But I understood what he meant. He was really looking for that fuller bodied Pinot Noir, and that's kind of been a trend with some producers to produce these to kind of capitalize on the popularity of the great Pinot Noir, not necessarily the inherent and true or classic style of Pinot Noir. So in a way, they kind of altered Pinot Noir.
do you find that that's an age difference? It's with younger wine enthusiasts, or is it?
No, I think it kind of stretches across the board a little bit. I think it's just experience. If you're and maybe a little bit of age in that if you're a younger person and you come into into your wine drinking kind of um, uh, you know, age range, and you're buying 10, 15, $20 Pinot Noirs from California, let's say, you might have a tendency at a high level or a high ratio to experience wines that maybe are not sort of in that classic formula. In the United States, we produce very elegant, very beautiful Pinot Noir. California and Oregon, the Willamette Valley is great for those. But you almost always have to kind of play a little bit to the geography of cooler climates to get that style. Just curious, I don't know that label off the top of my head, but does it have a region on it besides California? It might just say California. And if it does,
yeah, I don't see anything on here.
yeah, it probably just says California.
California, yeah, California, 2018.
Right. So that's the appellation. That's the place that the wine is originating from. And because it says California, they can pull those and source those grapes from anywhere within the state of California. So there tends to be, lots of vineyard productions on the interior part of California, away from the coast, that are warmer, because California, once you move about 30 or 40 miles away from the coast, you tend to increase the temperatures pretty dramatically. And there's plenty of vineyards in the Central Coast and regions farther away from the coastline. The Central Valley and regions farther away from the coastline, where you get these warm vineyards that produce generous fruit, lush, high, rich, full-bodied wines that actually are grapes that have that then produce wines, because they have a lot of sugar, can produce a lot of alcohol. And I think you have one of those wines there with 16% alcohol, which is, if you were to talk to somebody in Burgundy, kind of the classic home for Pinot Noir, if you were to say, hey, I've got Pinot Noir at 16%, they'd be like, how? Because you just can't produce that in places like Burgundy without adding alcohol. It's almost like you said this before, you kind of felt like, I think you said it almost was like something like port-like or whatnot.
It was like brandy.
It's like what?
It was like almost like drinking a brandy when I first tasted it.
Right. Because you're tasting the alcohol. There's so much alcohol in that wine.
There's a thing here on the bottle, Brian. It says lush and jammy with salted caramel notes, and that's nothing I ever associated with a Pinot Noir, and which is one of the reasons I was like, oh, well, I like that richer sort of taste. So I read that, and that's what made me buy it. And it kind of leaves me with two questions. The first question sort of goes back to a point that you made a couple minutes ago about the California grapes. They can source their grapes from anywhere in California. Yep. Does it go state by state? And I don't know anything about this. I'm curious. Mm-hmm. Is it just the state of California state laws, or is it a U.S. law? Like, is it where are the laws? Where I know in the bike industry, for example, when I used to manufacture bicycles, we could say made in the USA, but the sub-assemblies would be made in China and shipped over. There's actually a very popular bike company that claimed their mass production was made in the USA. And all they had to do was actually powder coat the frames when they arrived in the USA. And that had structural rigidity. So therefore they could say it was manufactured in the USA, and the whole frame itself is a sub-assembly. I'm wondering, is there anything like that with grapes? Like, can they source 75% of the grapes from, Chile or South America or wherever, but so long as 25% come from California? Or is this in fact 100% California grape?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And the related question is also, because that wine probably is not 100% of what it is, meaning Pinot Noir, what is the rules that regulate the actual amount of grapes that are in the wine? So you have the geographical sourcing, and then also the actual blend or the content of the wine. So to answer your question, the US has a law that is federally mandated about labeling. And as far as and so what you're asking about is the appellation. An appellation is a wine region, a designated wine region. It doesn't have to pay attention to political boundaries necessarily, although many of the broader ones do, like the United States is an appellation. So if you were to source your grapes anywhere in the United States, across state lines, essentially, you would have to default to the broader appellation, which would be the United States in that case. So if you only are sourcing your grapes within the state of California, then you use California. If you are sourcing across multiple counties, let's say, because the next size down is actually the county. So you have the US, the state, and then the county.
Right.
Then it gets a little tricky, because within the counties, and there are some appellations that actually cross over counties, but typically it's within the counties, you then might have some sub appellations. So Napa Valley is a good example, because within Napa Valley, there's a number of different sub appellations. So Napa County, which is the whole county, is one appellation. Napa Valley, which is a slightly more delimited zone, is a different appellation. And then within that, you might have sub-districts like Stag's Leap, Calistoga, St. Helena, Spring Mountain. There's like, I think 15 or 16 sub-appellations within Napa Valley. So the more specific you get, the more stringent the rules are. And the big broad regions are governed by the federal government. The smaller regions are actually approved by the federal government, by the Bureau of Alcohol and Tobacco and Trade. And but there are local regulations as far as where you're allowed to source, and it even relates a little bit to vintage too, because there's some regulation as far as the percentage of wine that you can have from, say, 2020 vintage. You're actually allowed a little bit of another vintage to blend in there, but it's like 95%. But some appellations have actually stipulated that 100% of the wine has to come from your appellation versus like 95% for some. So the idea is the more specific you get, the more limited the geography is. And this kind of goes back to, not to make this overly complicated, but it kind of goes back to the laws that they use in Europe, where they're very strict about the geographical sourcing of the wine and the strict protection of those regions. We like Chianti, for instance. Chianti is a region, it's a wine region, it's an appellation in Tuscany. It doesn't actually pay attention to any single, what we would relate to as, say, town or county. It overlaps a bunch, but it's a wine region. It's a designated wine region. And so the wine that comes from there, though, is not actually known by the geographical name. It's known by the wine region name, Chianti, because there's no grape variety Chianti. We actually in the United States know wines mostly by their grape variety. You're drinking Pinot. I have a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon in front of me. So geography is generally very specific. You have a wine that's from California, so they can source anywhere within California. But if you had a wine from Napa Valley, then the wine really can only come from Napa Valley. And sometimes there's other little regulations going in there. Now, the second part that I brought up is the grape variety content, or the grape blend that might be in the wine. So in the United States, you actually have a regulation that stipulates on the label that if you put Pinot Noir, at least 75% of what's in that bottle has to be Pinot Noir grapes. Okay. A lot of people don't know that, because then you can have 24.9% of some other grape variety. And I kind of have a feeling, because your wine is darker than Pinot, has higher alcohol content, it probably has another grape or other grapes blended into it. And that's what gives it that dark color. That's what gives it that bigger flavor. And certainly that probably that higher alcohol content. So they may be taking some Pinot Noir from a cooler region and some other grape from another region and blending it together to make that wine, to give it that bigger, fuller, intense, more richer kind of profile.
Now I get all that, but what about the actual process of making the wine? And are those same standards that you're talking about? Are they still somewhat not regulated, but like,
Yeah.
are those standards maintained? Because here it's like aged 75 days in brandy barrels.
Yeah, so that might account. Actually, you mentioned that it tasted like brandy, so that might actually account for it. And so there's
Is that
no.
something that's common with Pinot? Would they do,
Oh,
or like that
oh,
seems like it's almost, I don't know if it's a marketing gimmick or
well, actually, you just nailed it. I mean, it totally is a marketing gimmick with that
okay.
branding and that kind of thing, because whiskey's become very popular. That style of whiskey has become very popular over the last decade. Big, intense flavors have become really popular in wine consumption over the last few years. And so the
Bit of a whiskey bottle too, isn't it? I mean, that's not your
kind of
standard Pinot bottle.
or brandy shaped bottle, yeah.
Yeah.
So this brand has kind of just placed its mark on that, that aspect of having a bigger flavor, keying in on the aging and things like brandy barrels or whiskey barrels to give it a bigger flavor, more smokiness, more intensity. And because you have more alcohol, it almost kind of feels like drinking brandy, like you said. So it's a little challenging to kind of classic wine producers and
They putting lipstick on a pig here, though. I mean, like, really, are you going too far? Are you going too unorthodox with something that's?
listen, you bought it, and there's plenty of people out there that like wines like that. And I always say, I'm not going to bash a wine. I'm not going to sit here and write about or talk about a wine in a negative way. It's not my style wine necessarily, and I think it would be hard for me as a sommelier working on the floor of a restaurant to take that wine and be able to serve it to somebody. But for somebody like yourself, there's plenty of people who grab a bottle of that, take it home and drink it, and you enjoy it. Watching TV, having dinner, whatever you're doing. I just kind of feel like it would be tough for somebody like me to take a wine like that and really kind of enjoy it, because when I buy Pinot Noir, and Pinot Noir is probably the most drunk grape variety in my house because I just love Pinot Noir, whether it comes from California or Oregon or France or some other part of the world where they make great Pinot Noir. I just love Pinot Noir. So to me, that's a little bit, that's at the far end of the scale. Someone's kind of created, you said a gimmick, but it is a marketing plan that they've come up with to put that out there and attract a certain clientele, which is fine. And at the end of the day, if you as a consumer enjoy that wine, then that's really what matters. And it's not my opinion, and it's not somebody else's who writes for a magazine or whatever to say this is right or this is wrong for you to drink. If you like it, that's what's important. My goal always has been to come out and help educate people so that they can kind of break down the wine and understand what's in the glass, and then make an educated decision on what they want to drink from knowing what they're actually drinking and why something tastes like that. Why does it taste like brandy? Well, it's because it's aged in brandy barrels. Why does it have a high sugar content? Probably because it's got different grapes in there besides Pinot Noir, and those grapes, or all of those grapes, were sourced from warmer regions that built more sugar content into those grapes. 16% is high for any grape variety almost. Also understand why the flavor and the aromatics are there, and are they appropriate for Pinot Noir? I kind of describe Pinot Noir in a more classic sense, that it's red fruit driven. There should be a little bit of spice like cinnamon, maybe a little bit of earthiness, fresh mushrooms, and a delicate use of oak is typically going to be what most classic Pinot Noir producers are shooting for. And alcohol in a lot of Pinot Noir, because it does come from a cooler region, is going to be usually in the 13 to 13 and a half range, mostly. I mean, there's some that are a little bit higher, some that are a little bit lower. And Pinot Noir is also a thin-skinned grape variety, so you're not always going to get the intense color and flavor, but you get a lot of aromatics usually in Pinot Noir. So that's what the appeal is. So the wine you have there, in a way, is sort of the opposite of what I would kind of look for in Pinot Noir. But you like it. There's a consumer segment out there that wants wines that are Pinot Noir because that's fashionable to drink, but realistically they want to taste something more closer to Cabernet or whatever, fuller bodied. So it's hard because it's all subjective. Wine is a very subjective thing. I just try to educate people and help them understand what they're tasting, so that the next time they go shop, they can understand it. I find that, you said you paid about $25 for that wine. I kind of find that to be a little expensive for a wine of that nature. If I'm going to invest $25, which is quite honestly a lot of money for a bottle of wine, it's everybody's got their own relative, willingness to expend and whatnot. But I think $25 is a good amount of money to spend on a bottle of wine. If I'm doing that, I am personally going to be pretty careful about what I'm selecting, and I want something that's going to deliver what I consider to be a good $25 value. So,
what are some Pinots that you've tasted recently that you really like, that are really on your radar?
So I like, again, I mentioned this before, I like cooler climate Pinot Noir. So for me, I'm often going to Oregon, and there's some great wines in Oregon. Oregon is sort of like the middle ground in the United States between the bolder flavors that you get from California. And for me, there's three key regions in California that produce great Pinot Noir. There's others, but generally speaking, Santa Barbara, the Monterey region or the Central Coast area, and then up into the Sonoma Coast. And those are the regions, and they're broad regions, and there's lots of wineries in those, but those are the regions that really, for me, produce great California wines. Moving up to Oregon, I just find, because you're farther north, you're a little farther away from the equator, generally a little cooler for the most part. There's a slight balance, there's a little bit more acidity often in those wines, and they work well for me, but I'm happy to drink California Pinot. Ultimately, and you can't really for $25 anymore, I like Burgundy. I like drinking French Pinot Noir. I think where you get really great values though these days is going to different places. And I've had some great Chilean Pinot Noirs lately, and I've had some great South African Pinot Noirs, and they've got certain pockets in both countries where you're near the ocean, which is kind of key for a lot of wine regions, because the ocean moderates temperatures. And with climate change, we've experienced a lot of change in how vineyards are adapting and reacting, and the ability for them to kind of keep producing similar grapes and wine styles that they've done for centuries. So climate change is
Saltiness in the air in those coastal regions, doesn't that affect the soil, or
I
is
mean,
there any?
definitely can affect the soil. Definitely can affect the soil, but you have to be really like almost right on the ocean to really
Okay.
kind of get a dramatic effect from that. Um, I think it's more of a temperature kind of influence that you're really expecting from those coastal regions. And so, it's great for me to experience a wine that comes from a cool region in Chile, which has a long coastline, a lot of coastal influence, and has developed a really exciting wine program, or wine industry for a number of years, but they're really almost just kind of coming into their own now. I mean, the Cabernet that I'm drinking right now is a Chilean Cabernet, and it's a great value. It's delicious. It's well balanced. It has less alcohol in it than your Pinot Noir, but tastes great. But but Chile,
What brand is it?
I'm sorry.
What brand is it?
So it's actually a brand. It's one of Chile's largest producers. It's called Conchi Toro, but it's a tier that's called Marques Casa Concha. It's one of the sort of semi-premium tiers within the Conchi Toro range. Just pretty Cabernet. I had a single vineyard Sauvignon Blanc from them yesterday that I thought was absolutely delicious. Kind of, to me, was a nice alternative to say Sancerre, because it really wasn't pungent and too extracted like you might get from New Zealand. It was just really well balanced. But go back to Pinot Noir for a second. South Africa, I like a lot. South African wines, because it is like the Western Cape is a coastal area and tends to have a lot of ocean influence, and be, especially when you get to the southern parts near Walker Bay and whatnot, where you are really like running your vineyards almost down to the ocean, you tend to get a lot of that cool coastal influence. They make beautiful Pinots there. So I think good value regions like Chile and South Africa are good places to shop. And they're there. They're out there. The wines are out there. You just have to kind of know what you're looking for a little bit. But experiment. That's what's fun with wine. Is you can buy a bottle of wine this weekend and drink it and taste it. Say, yeah, I like it. No, I don't like it. And then go back next weekend and get another one that maybe is a little bit more suited. And so over time, you kind of learn to define what you like a little bit. And I like the fact, again, that you said Washington State, because I think Washington State is a region that suits your drinking style pretty well, because they tend to be a little bit more lush, a little bit fuller body, lower acid. It's a warm region. I would also suggest, if you like Washington State wines, shop for wines from Argentina, the Mendoza region, because the regions are sort of similar in their elevation and geography and grape variety selections and whatnot, and produce wines characteristically similar. So, good.
That's a lot of information. So what I took from that was I'm going to go to Argentina next week when I get a bottle, because I want to stay in the Pinot. I want to do a little comparing to this flavor. I think that this was, I wanted to try something really, really different. Something that just kind of was like, I never had tried brandy barrel aged Pinot Noir.
There's definitely an appeal for people for something like that to give it a try. I mean, the thing is, like, you had one or two producers came out a few years ago with wines that were kind of done slightly gimmicky, but they were done in whiskey barrels or whatever. And then the problem is that all of a sudden somebody starts to sell one or two of these wines, and then there's like 50 other producers that jump into the category. And I've tasted a bunch of these wines. They varying quality and everything, and it's sort of tough to kind of grasp on it. They get into a gimmick of a category kind of thing, and I don't know. Unfortunately, I think a wine like that just kind of changes what the public perception of Pinot Noir really should be about. I mean, Pinot Noir is a classic grape, and I like where Pinot fits in a channel in the wine world versus Cabernet versus Merlot versus Malbec or Zinfandel or whatever it is that are the other choices. And when you sort of blur those lines, we all end up just drinking red wine. And I like to drink Pinot Noir certain times because it's Pinot Noir. It's not that it tastes like Cab or Merlot or something else. It's that it tastes like Pinot. So
But I've had Pinot. I remember specifically where I was. I had a Pinot Noir. It was almost like it was as light as a pink Zinfandel. And I've had
sure,
that. And then
yeah,
I go to this, which is like drinking like coffee with booze in it or something. I mean, it's really
right,
thick stuff.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, so it's, unfortunately, I mean, okay, so here's the test. I mean, if you and I didn't have this conversation tonight and you went back to the store next weekend, would you buy another bottle of that wine?
I would probably look for something that's more of a classical Pinot Noir, that classical taste that I enjoy. But I'm trying to find that balance. I like Pinot Noir, but I'm looking for something that's a little bit more robust, not quite a Cabernet Sauvignon, which I enjoy. But I like Pinot Noirs, and I want to go to something rich. So what I'm hearing from you is Washington, Argentina, exploring those areas a little bit. That's where you're going to find your sweet spot.
Well, well, hang on a second. So Washington and Argentina, at least the Mendoza region, most common and largest wine producing region in Argentina, are not really classic places for Pinot Noir. So in the United States, Oregon, the Willamette Valley in particular, is the next closest region really for classic Pinot Noirs. And Chile in South America would be the source, I think, for more Pinots. They do make great Pinot Noir in certain parts of Argentina, but they tend to come from cooler climate areas, mainly farther south in Patagonia and spots like that. There are exceptions, but when you go to the Argentina wine section in your store, more than likely that section will be dominated by wines that come from Mendoza. And Mendoza is a high elevation desert. It's a warmer, more sunshine driven region. And so grapes like Malbec, Cabernet, and red blends tend to come from that area and dominate the wine offerings. If you move to more select areas, and it's kind of like in the United States, if you move farther north to Oregon, you're farther away from the equator, it's a little cooler, you get Pinot because Pinot really thrives in those cooler climates. The same in South America. If you move farther away from the equator, heading south into Patagonia, they make great Pinot Noir there, and kind of the same also almost in Chile. It's sort of like the farther you move south, but also the farther you move to the coast. In Chile, you end up with spots that make great Pinot Noir.
So one last question, Brian.
Yeah.
Where have you heard in the last few months? Where's one place that you never would have thought would be producing excellent wine, and then you're like, they're making wine there?
Yeah.
What have you heard of lately that just really sort of like made you kind of shake your head like, what?
Maine, USA. Maine. I've got bottles of Maine wine from Maine in my fridge downstairs right now, and it's absolutely delicious. It's absolutely
What part of
delicious.
Maine?
It's a good question. It's on the coast, and I don't actually know the town. My son goes to school up in Maine. We go there sometimes. I grabbed a couple bottles because they looked interesting. I've had one or two before that I thought were great. I haven't done a lot of research. Maybe next time we'll get a bottle and we'll open it up and we'll talk about it a little bit. But Maine, and actually I heard I've never had any wines from Vermont, oddly enough, but there's a good amount of wine that's being grown there. They're different grape varieties, maybe than what we're familiar with sometimes, but these are regions that are cool. I did have a great bottle of wine the other night that I picked up last weekend. It was from Austria, which is not an uncommon wine region. They make tons of great wines from Austria, but it was a blend, it was a grape, it was kind of a cool wine that I hadn't had before. And it was only like 12% alcohol, and it went down so easy, and it was fruity, it was delicious. Didn't have a cork, so I couldn't pop the cork. It was a crown cap. Just had to pop the cap, and it was great. So off varietals, different things from different places. But yeah, Maine, I'm interested to get into these wines that I picked up not too long ago that are in the fridge, and Vermont. We're gonna go up to Vermont, I think, this summer, and I'm gonna hopefully grab not just some cool beers up there, but also maybe find some wines that are grown up there.
Interesting. Cool.
Yeah. Well, you're in a region in New York there where you're not too far from Vermont, so it's just a carryover a little ways from that area to Vermont and the wine growing regions it's very similar. So
yeah.
All right, cool. Well, hopefully you enjoy your wine tonight, and cheers.
Thanks, Brian. Cheers.
Thanks for popping corks with me.